Today we're talking about parallel and perpendicular lines, and we start with a couple facts. Two non-vertical lines are parallel if they have exactly the same slopes. Well, that makes sense because just think of what a picture would look like. Two lines that are parallel, slope tells us about the steepness. So for them to be parallel, they have to have the same steepness, they just have different y-intercepts. And the second fact is two non-vertical lines are perpendicular if they have slopes that are called negative reciprocals. All right, that's a fancy word. In other words, the slopes are m1 and m2, then m2 is negative 1 over m1, or m1 times m2 equals negative 1. So let me give you some examples. If m2 is the number 3, then m1 would have to be negative 1/3. So it's called negative reciprocals. If this one's positive, this one has to be negative. And if you think of this as 3 over 1, we find the reciprocal, which is negative 1/3. Or another example, let's say m2 is negative 2/5. Then m1 would have to be positive 5/2. Since this one is negative, we put another negative in front of it. Two negatives make a positive, and we flip it. 2/5 flips to be 5/2. Okay, so our first question is, are the given lines parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Well, to tell, we look at the slopes. The slope of this one is 2, and the slope of that one is negative 2. The slopes are different. Since this one's 2 and this one's negative 2, they're not parallel. To be parallel, they have to be the same slope. And I also think they're not perpendicular, because if this one's 2, then to be negative reciprocal, that one would have to be negative 1/2. So this one is a neither. Alright, let's take a look at the next one. Here we have a slope of 2/3, and there we have a slope of negative 3/2. Again, I think we can immediately rule out parallel. They have different slopes, definitely not parallel. Perpendicular, I do think they're perpendicular, because if I start with 2/3, if I flip it over and make it negative, I do get negative 3/2. So those two are perpendicular. This one, y equals 5x minus 1, 10x minus 2y equals 13. All right, we have to do a little work on this one, because right away we can tell this one has a slope of 5. However, with this equation, I can't tell its slope. To tell its slope, I really need to get the y all by itself. So I'm going to take this equation and I'm going to subtract 10x on both sides. So negative 2y equals negative 10x plus 13. And then I have to divide by negative 2. So y equals 5x minus 13/2. So now that I have this in y equals mx plus b form, I can see that its slope is also 5. Slope is 5. Slope is 5. Parallel. Now, going back to B, something I wanted to show you on the graphing calculator. I went ahead and I typed these two equations in already, and I drew the graph. And if you look at them on a graphing calculator, they do not look perpendicular. This angle here does not look like a right angle. The reason for that is the tick marking on the axes isn't the same. If you look carefully, you can tell that the distance between two tick marks on the x-axis and the distance between two tick marks on the y-axis isn't the same. And so our graph is actually a little skewed. You can fix that by going zoom square number 5. And what that does is it changes the tick marks so that they're exactly the same distance apart on both the x-axis and the y-axis, and then those do look perpendicular. So that's just a little warning if you're using your calculator. Most of the time we use zoom 6 or some other window, and our tick marks might not be the same spacing, and so the graphs will not look perpendicular. Okay, after that we have consider the point 0, 5 and the line y equals negative 3x plus 2. Determine the equation of the line through the point and parallel to the line. Okay, so what they're giving us here is they're giving us one point. We have the point 0, 5. And then we want the parallel line? Well, I can look at this line back up here, and I can find its slope. From this line, I can see that slope is -3. So what they want me to do is find an equation with this point and that slope. Well, I would use, for this problem, y equals mx plus b. And the reason I would use y equals mx plus b is because I have this point. I know b is 5. They happen to give me a nice y-intercept. Answer is y equals -3x plus 5. Same directions, except now they find that now they say through the point and perpendicular to the line. Well, the only thing that changes is the slope. My answer is still going to be y equals mx plus b. Since this line has a slope of -1/3, I could call that, or I'm sorry, has slope of -3, the line I want has to have negative reciprocal. So think of that as being -3/1. I put another minus sign in front of it, that makes it positive, and I flip it. So I'm going to have almost the same answer, I'm just going to have a different slope. Y equals my slope now, since I want the perpendicular line, is 1/3 x, and my b number is still 5. Okay, let's take a look at number 3. Kind of the same problem. They're giving us a point, 1, -3, and we want the parallel line. Since we want the parallel line, we know our slope is 1/2. Now, this is my personal preference. I would use y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. You can go ahead and use y equals mx plus b and do it back like we did in the past. My personal preference is, if I do not know the y-intercept, I prefer this formula because I think it's less work, and that's my opinion. If you like y equals mx plus b, and you always want to use y equals mx plus b, you can. It will work. It will always give you the right answer. But my answer would be y minus -3, I'll write that as y plus 3, equals 1/2 times x minus 1. And for part B, it's very similar. I've got the same point, 1 -3, except now I want the perpendicular line, so this time my slope is going to be -2. I took this slope that I have, I flipped it, and I put a minus sign in front of it. And again, you can use y equals mx plus b if you want. I prefer this formula, so I would write y plus 3 equals -2 times x minus 1. Okay, I think we got one more problem to go. Similar to the previous two, we have a point, -2, 4, and we want the parallel line. It's similar to something we did before, similar to this problem back here, where we did not know the slope and we had to do a little work. Same deal here. Because the equation is given this way, we do not know the slope, so we have to do a little work to get y all by itself. I'm just going to write that down here, where I have some more room. 3x minus 5y equals 12. I subtract the 3x on both sides. Minus 5y equals minus 3x plus 12. Divide everything by -5. Y equals 3/5 x, two negatives make a positive there, minus 12/5. Since I want the parallel line, I know my slope is 3/5. Again, my preference would be to use this formula, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, because they did not give me the y-intercept. Y minus 4 equals 3/5 times x minus -2. I'm going to write that as x plus 2. Not a lot changes for the perpendicular line. It's going to be y minus 4 equals, the only thing that changes is the slope. I've got to flip it and make it negative, so that's going to be -5/3 times x plus 2. Alright, so this is kind of a short section, but Goes back to some of the skills we did in the last two sections, which is kind of a nice review.